In this 2D game art tutorial, I'll show you how I made a magical potion asset using Affinity Designer. The keys I'm using are in the bottom right corner of the viewport. I'm using a document that is 600 pixels by 600 pixels. I use the rectangle tool, which you can get to by using M, and create a background with a dark gray color. I lock the background layer so I don't accidentally select it. On a new layer, I use the ellipse tool, which you can also get to by using M, and make an ellipse for the bottom of my flask. And fill it with white. Choose the rectangle tool and make a small rectangle for the neck of the flask. Using the Move tool, which you can get to by using V, I align the neck to the bottom of the flask and send it to the back. I use the ellipse tool to make a flattened ellipse, which will be part of the top of the flask. I make a copy using Ctrl J and move it up by 60 pixels. I then make a rectangle to fit in between the two ellipses. I make another smaller ellipse and give it a gray color. This will be the shadow under the top of the neck. I duplicate the center rectangle and scale it down. Give it a gray color and change the opacity to 30%. This will be a highlight. I select all 5 parts of the top of the flask and group them together using Ctrl G. I make 2 copies of the bottom of the flask, moving the second one to the right by 30 pixels. I select both copies and use Subtract. I then change the size of this highlight I give the highlight a light gray color and change the opacity to 30% and move it into place. For the cork, I begin with a copy of the top ellipse. I scale the copy down and give it a brown color. I then move the piece of cork up by 5 pixels. I make a copy and move the copy up by 40 pixels. Using the rectangle tool, I make a rectangle to fit in between the two ellipses. I change the top ellipse's color to a lighter brown. I select all 3 parts of the cork and group them together. I add an ellipse and give it a mid-tone brown color with a blend mode of soft light. I then make 2 copies, filling them with a darker brown and moving the top one to the left. I then select the 2 copies and use Subtract to cut out a piece from the bottom copy. I group the 2 pieces and duplicate them, adding some texture to the cork. I make a copy of the cork and move it down into the center of the top of the flask. changing the opacity to 50%. I make a copy of the bottom part of the flask to be used for the potion. I change the size of the copy and fill it with a green color. I right-click on the potion and choose Convert to Curves. I use the node tool, which you can get to by using A, to add 2 nodes just above the center nodes on each side of the potion. I select both of the new nodes and the topmost node and delete them. I use the ellipse tool and add a flattened ellipse to the top of the potion. Changing the color to a lighter green. I right-click and convert the ellipse to a curve. I then use the node tool to give the ellipse a slight curve. I select the potion layer and rotate it slightly. I make a copy of the bottom portion of the potion and give it a darker color. I scale it down and move it toward the bottom of the potion. I drop the opacity to 50% and add a Gaussian blur. For the bubbles, I draw an ellipse and fill it with a gray. I duplicate the ellipse and give it a white stroke, aligned to the inside. I then draw a rectangle over the top of the white outline with a slight rotation. I select both objects and use Subtract to remove the top part of the stroke. Then go into the pixel persona, select a hard brush, and use the eraser to remove the unwanted parts of the stroke. Add a small white ellipse toward the top of the bubble. I group all three parts and change the blend mode to overlay. Making copies and placing them around the potion. I select the cork and the top of the flask and move them into position. And I move the highlight to the top of the layer stack. If you have a request for a tutorial, a question, or a comment, feel free to leave a comment below the video. If you're interested in learning more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.